Hey guys, and welcome back to another analysis video on my channel. On the agenda today we have a very interesting miniature game from the recent European Chess Cup in Serbia. The game is quite short, so stay with me, but I think you'll all learn a very useful and interesting pattern that must be remembered in chess play. So I think it's a very good and instructive game to see. We have, with the white pieces, a very young French grandmaster, Marc-Andrea Maurizzi, very strong player, very young, 14 years old. He was a world champion, and recently he was, I think, also world champion or second in the world championship under 20, so he's a very strong player. With the black pieces, Nicholas Wachinger from Germany, international master, obviously a very strong player, although unfortunately today he didn't have his best performance, but that happens to every player, so nothing to be ashamed about, just push on and all is good. But he's a very strong player, still also quite young, so I think he'll still be trying to pursue his grandmaster title. Before we start the game, just to clarify, I'm normally publishing videos every day or every 2 days. However, this past week, I've been on the chess tour, the chess cruise in Croatia, Italy, and and Greece and the Greek islands. 8 days from Venetia back to Venetia on the Adriatic Sea. A very pleasant experience. I've got to know new people, new friends. I've also visited 2 or 3 countries, hadn't been there before. So if any of you are interested in the chess tour to play or just to accompany, then this is done every year for already 10 years. I've been on 3. So I'll obviously publicize next year's cruise on this channel. So make sure you subscribe and don't miss any videos, especially when September, October comes around, which are the dates for the cruise. Okay, so let's get on to the game. Maurizzi played e4. And Wachinger played c5 and d6. So he's already intending maybe the dragon or maybe the Najdorf. We still don't know which of these 2 variations he's going to go for. He could even go for the classical Sicilian. So normally Maurizzi would play d4 here. And after this sequence, we'd get the Najdorf, as I said before, the dragon, or the classical. There's even the possibility of a Scheveningen, although nowadays hardly anyone plays a Scheveningen. So there's 4 lines after d4. Maurizzi plays knight to c3, which is a very interesting move because now, depending which of these defenses Wachinger wanted to play, he has to be careful not to be move ordered. For example, if he wants to play the dragon, he would have to go for knight f6 here, so to transpose after d4. But white doesn't have to play d4 here. And maybe Wachinger doesn't want to play g6, unless white goes d4. If he wants to play, for example, the classical, he could go for knight f6 or knight to c6. But if he goes for knight to c6 to play the classical, maybe white doesn't go d4 and goes d3 or d3 or b3 or a4. So many different lines. So he has to be careful. Wachinger goes knight to f6, probably intending the dragon or the Najdorf. And Maurizzi plays bishop to e2, which is a slightly passive, although not a bad move, because he still keeps d4 in hand. So obviously against dragon, Najdorf or classical, he's going to play the bishop to e2 variation, the solid variation. But maybe he noticed that Wachinger doesn't like to enter in that variation and that he will play e5, which is what Wachinger did. And now we have a different pawn structure. Of course, with his move, which is perfectly correct, Wachinger avoids the move d4. However, he fixes the pawn structure, and maybe Maurizzi noticed that Wachinger wasn't playing too well in fixed and closed pawn structures. So that's why he went for this variation. Who knows? But now he goes bishop to c4. Effectively, he's lost a tempo. He's lost a tempo by playing bishop to e2 and the bishop to c4. But he has achieved his preferred pawn structure, even though he lost a tempo, which is interesting. As you can see, he wants to play d3 and connect the 3 pawns, but he doesn't want to leave his bishop inside the connected pawn structure. Of course, black is perfectly fine from a theoretical point of view. However, it's unclear if Wachinger enjoys playing these positions more than the other ones. d3, knight to c6, bishop to g5, a good move. White would exchange on f6 and try and control the d5 square. There might be an argument here for the move h6. I didn't check this one with the computer, but I think this would be reasonable, preventing bishop to g5 and therefore reinforcing the control over the d5 square. In any case, Wachinger played knight c6, bishop d5, bishop to e6, and now bishop takes f6 and knight to d5. Of course, here, at any moment, black can eliminate the knight. In this case, white will take with the bishop, and although this is approximately equal, it's slightly easier to play for white, who can continue with b3, castle, maybe a4, try and go for a bind on the light squares. It's not a big advantage, but black does have his bishop slightly blocked in by his pawns. It's a very small positional advantage, which Maurizzi, I'm sure, wants to do. Of course, knight to e7 here, to try and chase the knight away, would not lose, but leave black with a slightly worse position after this exchange. Finally, using the computer, I noticed a very interesting line. If black plays bishop to g5, it looks like a blunder, because knight takes, queen takes, knight to c7 wins the rook. However, I pushed along with the computer to check this variation, so I noticed that black would capture the pawn on g2. Look what I found. King to d7, knight takes rook, bishop takes c4, and now queen takes g2, hitting the rook. And after rook to f1, queen takes e4 check, the computer was actually saying that this position with a knight and 2 pawns for the rook was actually better for black. So obviously Maurizzi would have noticed this for sure. But it's interesting to see that sometimes the obvious moves are not the best. Now, Wachinger played rook to b8, threatening b5, but also allowing bishop to g5 on the next move. Maybe he noticed that knight to c7 was not so good, but just didn't want to calculate that variation. In any case, rook to b8 threatening b5 is very good. And after a4, now he goes for bishop to g5. Knight takes, queen takes, and castle. Castle, and white plays c3. So now we have a position which, as I said before, is very slightly better for white, very slightly better. And black has several very decent moves. Black can play h6, just protecting the queen and waiting to see what white does on his next move. You might ask yourselves, why would black want to protect the queen? Another possible move, king to h8, just in case later on we want to go for f5. Other interesting moves are getting this rook into play with rook to c8, maybe a6 with the idea b5. We could also exchange off the knight, as we said before. So many interesting moves for black here. But one move he shouldn't do, although it's a very plausible move, but he shouldn't do, is knight to e7, which unfortunately was Wachinger's choice in the game. Now, I'm sure, completely sure, that Wachinger had noticed that the knight is protected by the queen and that the exchange of knights would be very good for him. And also I'm sure he had noticed that if white plays h4, we just capture the pawn and we keep the protection of the knight. And if white goes g3, we just drop back and we still protect the knight. And also if white plays f4, we capture the pawn on g3 with check. I'm sure Wachinger had calculated these lines. Completely sure. But what he hadn't calculated is another move, which I'm going to offer for you guys to try and decide. And if you spot it, write it down in the comment section. I want to know which of you are good tacticians. So take a pause, think about it. We would like to deviate that queen because it protects the knight. Did you see it? Leave me your answer in the comments. I'm sure you did. It's queen to c1. A wonderful move which actually forced Wachinger to call it a day and resign. Of course, if he captures the queen, we stick in the intermediate move, knight takes e7, check, and then we recapture with the rook and we have an extra piece and a winning position. And if instead of that he goes queen to h4, now g3 hits the queen and leaves black with a completely lost position. Before we finish, and here Wachinger decides to resign, this position made me recall a very old game I saw, a John Nunn game, where in a very similar situation, John Nunn had an extra piece, lost his queen, but played something like this, and ended up winning the game with two pieces, not one, but two pieces for the queen. So maybe Wachinger should have carried on this game just a few more moves. Of course, I'm sure he would have lost, but you never know. You never know. I don't think in any case that here Maurizzi would have exchanged the bishop, because I'm noticing that bishop takes e6. Now knight to e2 would be a very funny move to try and win the game. It's actually quite funny that this tactic existed. I didn't see this before. So maybe he should have tried g3, take here and see what happens. Of course, I'm sure that Maurizzi would have taken his time, played probably queen to e3, bishop takes, pawn takes, and this obviously is lost. But a knight on f4 can prove to be dangerous during many moves, and maybe some resistance could have been put up, although I'm sure Maurizzi would have won the game. So a very interesting, very short, but very instructive game on hanging pieces and make sure all your pieces are protected, because loose pieces do drop off. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe and take your time to leave a comment below. And as always, keep getting better and especially have fun.